From ego to essence, how identity emerged. The story of identity begins long before names, long before language, long before the first human looked into a still pool of water and wondered who the reflection belonged to. It begins in the quiet pulse of early life, in the drifting tides of sensation, in the vast field of existence where there was once no distinction between inner and outer. And yet, from that raw simplicity, the first threads of what would one day become the human sense of self slowly emerged. As we enter this journey together, allow your breath to settle naturally. Let your shoulders soften just a little. This is not a journey we rush. It is one we inhabit, step by step, layer by layer, through biology, memory, myth, consciousness, and culture. A documentary not just about humanity, but about the mystery unfolding inside your own awareness moment by moment. Identity is not a single thing. It is not a fixed point. It is a living landscape, shaped by forces older than Earth's forests, deeper than our languages, and more fluid than the stories we tell. Identity is an echo of survival, of community, of emotion. It is a constellation of brain networks, ancestral instincts, childhood tenderness, and philosophical questions whispered across centuries. Tonight, we trace its origins. We explore how life first separated self from world, how minds learned to recognize one another, how memory stitched the past into continuity, how cultures carved identities through stories and symbols, how ego arose as both armor and compass, and how, beneath all the layers, there may be something quieter, something deeper, something more essential than the shifting patterns of personality. Feel the breath again. Slow, easier. This is a journey into the heart of human experience, a journey from ego to essence, a journey into how identity emerged. And now, as the opening settles gently in the mind, we move back through time, billions of years, to the very first flicker of selfhood, the first sense of self. Long before the first mind wondered who it was, long before dreams or fears or memories, life existed as a delicate boundary, a fragile separation between the swirling world outside and the vulnerable chemistry within. If you imagine the early Earth, billions of years ago, it was a place of restless energy. Oceans boiling with minerals, lightning stitching across heavy clouds, volcanic vents exhaling heat into darkness. In this world, tiny molecular structures drifted, collided, combined, and dissolved. There was no purpose, no intention, no identity. And yet, in this chaotic environment, something remarkable emerged. A membrane, a boundary, a thin, trembling line that divided inner from outer. Inside this boundary, reactions could stabilize. Molecules could organize. A tiny pocket of order could hold itself apart from the surrounding storm of randomness. This is where the earliest sense of self began, not as thought or emotion, but as resistance, as the ability to maintain internal conditions against the pressures of the world. Every cell alive today carries this legacy. The membrane is the ancestor of every I, the foundation of identity's long evolution. Without it, there would be no self to protect, no body to inhabit, no mind to emerge. You might take a moment to notice your breath again, quietly, gently, the inhale and the exhale. Even in you, that same ancient biological dance continues, an interior maintained against the world outside, a living echo of early life's first attempt to become a self. The earliest organisms were simple, but their behavior was profound. They sensed chemical gradients in the water, moved toward nutrients, pulled away from toxins. These actions were not guided by thought, but they were guided by difference. To sense something as favorable or hostile is to recognize a distinction: inner state versus outer condition, comfort versus threat. This was the first whisper of identity. Over millions of years, these abilities expanded. Organisms developed increasingly complex systems for navigating the world. Sensory structures began to form. Cells clustered into organisms with specialized roles. The earliest nervous systems flickered into existence as thin networks of communication, allowing bodies to coordinate movement, to respond more quickly, to adapt with greater nuance. Imagine an early ocean creature, small and soft, gliding through sunlit waters. It senses pressure changes. It responds to shadows passing overhead. It withdraws from danger. It moves toward warmth. It explores. It remembers, in small biochemical traces, what was safe and what was not. In this simple dance between organism and environment, the groundwork of a self was being written. Take a breath, in and out. Notice the space around you and the space within you. That division, that boundary, is ancient. It is life's first declaration. This is me, and that is not me. As nervous systems evolved, these distinctions sharpened. Organisms could recognize patterns, anticipate outcomes, learn from experience. In a sense, early forms of selfhood became more flexible, more expressive. Instead of simply reacting, they could adapt. And adaptation is a kind of identity. Each creature's behavior, shaped by its structure and history, became its unique signature of survival. Over hundreds of millions of years, the diversity of life expanded into forests, oceans, deserts, and skies. But beneath every fin, feather, or leaf, the same principle held. Identity begins with a boundary, with the maintenance of inner order, with the awareness, however primitive, that there is a self to protect and sustain. Now imagine the first creatures capable of something more complex. Not just sensing the world, but sensing themselves in it. Vertebrates developed more intricate nervous systems, enabling new forms of interaction. Fish could navigate currents and recognize territories. Amphibians could assess moisture levels in the air and choose the best moment to move. Reptiles began responding to temperature and adjusting their behavior accordingly. These were not thoughts as humans think them, but they were seeds of agency choices shaped by internal conditions. Agency is another layer of identity. To act in the world, not only because the environment demands it, but because something inside the organism drives it. Hunger, curiosity, fear, attraction. These ancient impulses guided the movements of early life, carving the first channels of motivation. Let the breath come softly again. A quiet reminder that your own motivations arise from deep biological roots. Hunger, curiosity, fear, attraction. These still shape your experience in every moment. As mammals emerged, the development of the brain accelerated evolution's work. A new structure, the limbic system, brought emotional coloring to experience. Pleasure and pain became not just reactions, but signals, guides, internal maps for survival. Identity deepened. Experience started to matter. The world could be remembered not only as safe or unsafe, but as comforting, nourishing, threatening, or promising. The first mammals, small and nocturnal, relied on warmth, touch, and social closeness for survival. These early social bonds planted another seed of identity, the idea that the self exists not only in the body, but in the relationship. That survival depends not only on boundaries, but on connection. The journey of identity moved from membrane to mind, from simple reaction to patterned behavior, from solitary existence to early forms of attachment. Over millions of years, the sense of self grew more textured, more layered, more responsive. Pause for a moment. Let the mind settle. Feel the continuity between those early organisms and the living presence you inhabit now. The same principles still operate inside you, though woven into vastly more complex patterns. As mammals evolved into primates, and primates into increasingly social beings, identity reached a new threshold. A transformation shaped not only by biology, but by the pressures and gifts of living together. The next chapter unfolds in the forests where the social brain begins its rise, where identity becomes not only an internal phenomenon, but a reflection shaped by others. And so, with a quiet breath, we move forward in time, toward the emergence of a deeper, more relational self. The social brain. Identity does not grow in isolation. It unfolds through connection, shaped by the presence of others, refined by the demands and gifts of community. To understand how the modern self came to be, we must step into the ancient forests where our early primate ancestors lived, breathed, played, fought, and recognized one another as individuals long before humans existed. Take a slow breath as we move into this world. Let the mind settle just a little. Imagine the canopy of trees above, sunlight filtering through leaves, the distant calls of creatures moving through branches. This is where the next great transformation of identity begins. Primates were not the first social creatures, but they were among the first to develop extremely complex social structures. With these structures came a new evolutionary pressure, the ability to understand others, to anticipate their intentions, to remember alliances, to track hierarchies, to sense shifting moods and dynamics. In this crucible of social life, the brain began to expand, not primarily to understand the world, but to understand other minds. This is the beginning of what researchers call the social brain hypothesis, the idea that the key driver of primate intelligence was the need to manage relationships. Identity became more than a boundary or a reaction. It became a social presence. Picture a group of early primates grooming one another in a quiet clearing. This simple act, fingers moving slowly through fur, removing insects and debris, was far more than hygiene. Grooming released oxytocin, strengthened bonds, reduced stress, and reinforced alliances. To be groomed was to belong. To groom another was to affirm trust. In that space, identity was shaped by touch, by attention, by the subtle rhythm of mutual care. Allow a moment for your breath to soften. Feel how connection, even imagined, influences the body. How the idea of belonging can loosen tension in the chest or soften the muscles around the face. This connection between physical ease and social safety is ancient, millions of years old. As groups grew larger, grooming alone was not enough to maintain cohesion. More sophisticated forms of communication emerged: gestures, calls, facial expressions, posture. These developments required increasingly complex neural circuits. The brain learned to read microsignals, to interpret glances, to decode emotional tones. Identity became relational. Not just, I am alive, but I exist in relation to you. In a group of social primates, every individual has a role. A mother protecting her young, a juvenile exploring and learning, a dominant individual defending status, a subordinate navigating caution and opportunity. Over thousands of generations, these roles etched themselves into the biology of behavior. Identity gained depth as individuals became recognizable, each with their tendencies, their temperaments, their histories. It is no accident that humans today feel their sense of self expand or contract depending on the social situation. We carry within us these ancient dynamics. We are shaped by the same forces that sculpted early primate groups. Imagine an early primate watching another member of the group retrieve food from a hidden place. The observer pays attention, remembers the action, and later imitates it. This is social learning, a powerful force in shaping identity. It teaches not only behaviors, but expectations, preferences, and possibilities. Identity becomes something absorbed, transmitted, cultivated within a group. This social intelligence eventually led to the emergence of something extraordinary, the ability to understand intention. To recognize that another individual has goals, desires, and motivations separate from one's own. This is the seed of theory of mind, the ability to attribute mental states, the beginnings of empathy. Let your breath deepen gently. Notice how your own awareness of others forms part of your identity. The way you read expressions, interpret tone, sense subtle shifts in mood. These skills feel personal, but they are ancient inheritance. In primate groups, survival depended heavily on understanding social cues. Misreading them could lead to conflict. Reading them well led to alliance. And alliance meant protection, access to resources, and support during danger. Thus, the brain evolved to pay exquisite attention to social information, far more than to any other kind. Over time, as social life became more intricate, neural networks related to memory, emotion, and perception grew denser. The prefrontal cortex expanded, enabling long-term planning, impulse control, and complex decision-making. Identity became more strategic, more reflective. Not only what am I feeling now, but how will this action shape my standing in the group? This internal negotiation is still alive within us. Every time you weigh a social decision, how to respond, how to present yourself, whether to speak or remain silent, you feel the echo of this evolutionary stage. Now imagine the moment our ancestors began caring for offspring in more sophisticated ways. Longer dependency meant more learning meant more modeling of behaviors. And this modeling meant identity could now pass through generations in increasingly rich forms. Not just instinct, but culture. Not just reaction, but tradition. The emergence of stable family groups deepened emotional bonds. A parent's identity was shaped by responsibility. An infant's identity was shaped by safety or danger. Early forms of attachment laid the foundation for the emotional self. The part of identity that forms through affection, trust, reassurance, or the lack of it. Let your breath flow with ease for a moment. Feel how relationships have shaped you, the comfort of connection, the sting of rejection, the hunger for recognition. These experiences are not modern inventions. They are continuations of evolutionary patterns shaped in ancient forests. As our ancestors became more social, the need for cooperation grew. Hunting required teamwork. Protection required coordination. Sharing food required fairness. Identity became collaborative. The sense of I intertwined with the sense of we. But social life also introduced conflict, jealousy, competition, rivalry. Identity had to navigate between cooperation and self-preservation, between empathy and assertion. These tensions shaped the psychological architecture of the self. The need for belonging and the need for autonomy became twin forces pulling at the mind. Eventually, certain primate species developed the ability to recognize themselves in reflective surfaces. This self-recognition, rare in the animal kingdom, marked a profound shift. It indicated not only awareness of the body, but a concept of self as an object in the world. This was one of the earliest hints of the reflective self, the version of identity that can observe itself. Humans would later expand this capacity into introspection, storytelling, philosophy, and spiritual exploration. But the seed was planted here, in the social brain. Take another gentle breath. Sense the continuity of evolution shaping your capacity to connect, to care, to understand, to reflect. The social brain is not simply a feature of human life. It is the soil from which the human self grew. In the next chapter, this evolving self meets something transformative, something that extends identity across time, giving shape and meaning to experience. Memory, the beginnings of personal narrative, the thread that stitches moments into a story. With a soft exhale, we move now toward the emergence of continuity, the dawning of the self in time. Memory and story. To understand identity, we must understand time. Not the abstract ticking of minutes, but the felt experience of past, present, and future. Without memory, there is only the now immediate sensation, fleeting reaction, no thread connecting one moment to the next. With memory, experience becomes cumulative. Patterns emerge. Lessons take root. The self begins to persist. Take a slow, settling breath as we enter this terrain. Let the space around you soften, as though the mind is opening a quiet corridor into the past. Long before humans walked the earth, memory existed in primitive forms. Early organisms recorded chemical traces of experience, what was nourishing, what was harmful. These traces shaped future behavior, guiding survival. Over time, biological memory grew more sophisticated. Neural networks formed. Signals strengthened or weakened based on consequences. This was the beginning of learning, the beginning of continuity. Imagine a small mammal navigating its environment. It remembers where food was found yesterday. It recalls the scent of a predator. It recognizes the path that leads home. Each memory adds texture to its world. With this texture comes an embryonic sense of identity. Not I as a concept, but a consistency in behavior shaped by experience. Memory is the foundation of the psychological self. It is what allows us to say, I was, I am, I will be. It is what creates a story. Let your breath deepen gently. Think of how your own identity is woven through memory childhood moments, relationships, turning points, quiet afternoons, unexpected joys, lingering wounds. Each one a thread in the tapestry of who you believe yourself to be. As the hominid brain evolved, memory became rich, layered, and emotionally charged. The hippocampus, a small, curved structure deep in the brain, began to play a crucial role. It wove sensory input with emotional tone, linking experience with feeling. A safe place felt warm and open. A dangerous place felt tight and urgent. These emotional markers made memories easier to store and retrieve, creating internal maps of meaning. Over millions of years, hominids developed increasingly complex episodic memory, the ability to recall specific events in vivid detail. Not just what happened, but where, when, and how it felt. This gave rise to a profound development, the capacity for mental time travel. Early humans could revisit the past and imagine the future. This ability transformed identity. A creature who remembers can learn. A creature who learns can transform. Now imagine an early human sitting near a fire at dusk. The flames flicker, casting shadows on the walls of a cave. The smell of smoke rises gently. The day's events replay in the mind. Successes, failures, risks, rewards. For the first time in evolutionary history, an organism is not only living its life, but reflecting on it. The self becomes more than sensation, more than emotion. It becomes narrative. Take a quiet breath. Feel the warmth of that imagined fire, the soft crackle of wood, the sense of being inside a moment, fully aware of it. This capacity to inhabit and remember an experience is the essence of consciousness as story. As language began to develop, memory changed forever. Words allowed early humans to organize experience. They provided names for things, actions, emotions, places. Naming gave structure to memory. Structure allowed for communication, and communication allowed stories to form. The birth of storytelling was one of the most important events in the evolution of identity. Stories held collective memory. They preserved lessons. They explained the world. They created heroes, ancestors, origins. Stories allowed a tribe to share identity, to carry a narrative larger than any individual life. Humans began telling stories around fires, under stars, through cave art, through ritual and song. These stories became mirrors. They reflected who a community was, what it valued, what it feared, what it believed. They also reflected individuals back to themselves. This is who I am, because this is the world I belong to. Let your breath ease. Feel the way story shapes your own self. The story of your childhood, the story of who you think you are, the story of your future, the story of your worth. These narratives are not random. They are inherited from thousands of generations of humans who needed stories to survive. 1. As cognitive complexity grew, so did the ability to structure life as a narrative arc. Early humans learned to see themselves as characters. They recognized patterns in their behavior. They interpreted dreams. They told stories of origins and endings. Identity became something woven, not just felt. But memory is not perfect. It is subjective, selective, shaped by emotion and interpretation. Two people can experience the same event and remember it differently. And even within one person, memory changes over time. We revise our stories. We reinterpret our past. We edit our identities. This flexibility is not a flaw. It is part of what makes identity dynamic. The ability to reinterpret the past allows humans to grow, heal, and evolve. Memory is not a record. It is a creation. Each recollection is an act of storytelling, shaped by who we are now, not merely who we once were. Take a slow breath. Notice how your thoughts, like shifting clouds, are constantly rearranging your internal story, how identity moves with them, adapting and expanding. The modern human brain spends a great deal of time in what neuroscientists call the default mode network, a constellation of brain regions involved in mind-wandering, self-reflection, and narrative thinking. When the mind drifts, it often returns to the self, who we are, what we want, what we fear, what we remember, what we imagine. This internal storytelling is central to our sense of identity. But identity doesn't only emerge from memory. It also emerges from protection, from the inner structures that help us navigate the world's dangers, expectations, and emotional storms. As memory gave rise to story, story gave rise to self-concept, and self-concept needed a guardian, a curator, a defender. This is where the next chapter begins, the birth of ego. With one more slow breath, we step gently into the realm of psychological structure, into the part of the self that shields, defines, and sometimes confines us. The birth of ego. The ego did not appear suddenly, nor did it arise as a fully formed psychological entity. It emerged slowly, shaped by evolution, emotion, social life, and the growing complexity of human consciousness. To understand ego is to understand a layer of identity that protects, organizes, and defines. A layer that becomes the manager of the inner world. Take a slow breath before we enter this terrain. Feel the mind settle, like a lake surface evening into stillness. The ego lives in the space where memory, emotion, and social expectations intersect. It is not an enemy, it is not a flaw. It is an achievement of evolution. Imagine early humans living in small groups, moving through forests, grasslands, and river valleys. Life was beautiful, but harsh. Danger was everywhere: predators, starvation, conflict, the unknown. For survival, the mind needed a system to negotiate the tension between instinct and environment, between desire and risk, between impulse and consequence. The ego began as this negotiator. The earliest forms of ego were simple: a sense of my body, my food, my mate, my territory. These early claims were not selfish in the modern sense, but essential for survival. Boundaries had to be established. Needs had to be protected. The organism had to prioritize its own continuity. Over time, as emotional and cognitive capacities grew, these boundaries became internalized into a structure, a sense of self that saw itself as separate, continuous, important. This continuity allowed humans to plan, to commit, to maintain identity across situations. Ego became the bridge between instinctive drives and the social world. Let your breath deepen gently. Notice the quiet presence of your own ego, the part of you that watches, that guards, that narrates, that explains. It is not the totality of who you are, but it is the familiar voice inside the mind. As human societies grew more complex, the ego grew more sophisticated. There was a need to consider one's reputation, one's role, one's place. Social groups demanded cooperation, but also created competition. Ego navigated this tightrope, balancing the need to belong with the need to assert individuality. The ego is, in many ways, a social creation. We mirror our parents, our peers, our community. We internalize rules, norms, expectations. The ego forms around these pressures like clay shaped inside a mold. In early childhood, as language develops, children begin to use the word I. This is a landmark moment. The child begins to experience itself as the center of perspective, as the subject of its own story. This early ego is fragile. It needs protection. It needs validation. It needs structure. From these needs, psychological defenses emerge ways the ego shields itself from emotional overwhelm. These defenses are not intentional. They are biological. Denial, projection, rationalization, avoidance. They are strategies for maintaining coherence. In early human societies, the ego served not only as protection, but as identity's custodian. It held memories, managed emotions, learned from experience. It decided whom to trust and whom to fear. It formed alliances, nurtured attachments, shaped personality. Picture an early human facing a conflict within their tribe, perhaps a disagreement over food or territory. The ego evaluates the situation. It weighs risks. It decides whether to confront, withdraw, appease, or negotiate. This internal decision-making reflects the ego's role as an executive function, a manager of impulses and outcomes. Let your shoulders soften slightly. Feel how your own ego makes decisions daily, often without awareness. How it guides behavior to preserve your sense of stability. As spiritual traditions later emerged, they observed the ego from a different angle. Philosophers and mystics noticed that ego shapes perception, coloring the world through desire and fear. They saw how ego creates a sense of separateness, me versus you, self versus other. This separation is not inherently wrong. It is part of identity's architecture, but it can also become a cage, a limitation. The rise of agriculture, settlements, and civilization added new layers to ego. People developed roles: farmers, healers, warriors, leaders. These roles became extensions of identity. Ego now had cultural responsibilities: honor, status, reputation, shame, pride. These emotions guided behavior as powerfully as hunger or fear once had. The emergence of written language allowed ego to become even more complex. Humans could now reflect on themselves through symbols and stories. They could describe their inner states, question their motives, analyze their actions. Ego became self-conscious, self-critical, self-reflective. Pause for a breath. Feel how the ego evaluates even this moment, whether you're comfortable, whether you understand, whether you're engaged. The ego constantly scans, measures, compares. It is vigilant because its job is to maintain the self. But ego is not the whole story. Beneath it lies essence, the quiet awareness that simply experiences without judgment. Ego is the character. Essence is the witness. But we will come to essence later, after understanding the layers built over millennia. The ego also gave rise to something important: morality. To live in groups, humans needed to regulate behavior. Ego learned to align with social norms. Do not steal. Do not harm. Share with the group. These teachings, often enforced through reward or punishment, shaped the moral self. Ego became the container for right and wrong, shaping decisions and identity. Yet ego also brought challenges: anxiety, shame, comparison, competition, the fear of rejection, the impulse to defend one's image. These psychological tensions became part of the human condition. Still, ego was essential. Without it, identity would dissolve, goals would vanish, boundaries would blur. Ego allowed humans to differentiate, to strive, to survive, to create. In early civilizations, as cities rose and empires expanded, ego took on new heights. People began to see themselves as part of larger stories, kingdoms, religions, cultural narratives. Ego became intertwined with belief, ideology, and myth. A person's identity was shaped not only by family and tribe, but by cosmic stories of creation and destiny. Take a slow breath. Notice how your own ego draws from countless sources: family, culture, memories, dreams, fears, experiences. It is a mosaic, not a monolith. But while ego gave humans structure, it also created masks, performances, roles that could hide the deeper self. This brings us to the next chapter: the masks we wear and the roles that shape identity. The ways we perform who we think we are and who we believe we must be. With a quiet exhale, we move forward into the realm of masks and roles. Masks and roles. Identity is not only something we feel, it is something we perform. Every society across time has shaped its members through roles, expectations, and social scripts. These roles act like masks, not to deceive, but to adapt, to belong, to navigate the delicate balance between individual expression and collective survival. Take a slow breath as we step into this ancient theater of human life. Feel the body settle. The stage we're about to explore is vast, stretching from early tribal rituals to modern social identities. Long before civilization, early humans lived in small groups where each person had particular responsibilities. Some were skilled hunters, others were gatherers, toolmakers, caretakers, storytellers, or watchers of the night. These roles were essential for survival. A role gave structure to life and contributed to the tribe's well-being. It also shaped identity. A hunter thought like a hunter. A healer thought like a healer. A child learned through observation who they might one day become. As groups expanded, roles became more defined. Rituals emerged. Initiation ceremonies marked transitions between childhood and adulthood. In these rituals, young individuals were symbolically given new identities, new masks that signified their place in the community. Imagine a young adolescent in an early tribe standing before a circle of elders. The fire crackles. The night air is cool. The adolescent is about to receive a new name or a new symbol marking maturity. This moment is not merely social. It is psychological. The individual steps into a new identity, one shaped by tradition and expectation. Let your breath soften, as though you are witnessing this ancient ceremony. Roles carry weight. They shape how we see ourselves and how others see us. As agriculture emerged and settlements grew, society became more stratified. Farmers, artisans, priests, warriors, leaders, each role came with responsibilities and privileges. Identity became more tightly bound to occupation. One's role in society determined status, influence, and relationships. Stories began to reflect these roles. Myths celebrated heroes, kings, tricksters, and sages, reinforcing social structures. These roles acted like early masks. Masks are not lies. They are adaptations, tools for navigation. Humans have always shifted behaviors depending on context. A different self at home, a different self in ritual, a different self in conflict or negotiation. Even today, people shift in tone, posture, language, and expression depending on the situation. This adaptability is not superficial. It is one of the mind's greatest strengths. Consider how masks appear in modern life. The professional mask, the family mask, the social mask, the private mask. Each one is a facet of identity, shaped by expectation and circumstance. We behave differently with strangers than with close friends. We present ourselves differently at work than in moments of vulnerability. Pause for a gentle breath. Think of how your own masks shift throughout the day, how roles guide behavior, shaping the contours of your identity. Anthropologists have long observed that masks were essential elements in early rituals. In many cultures, masks represented spirits, ancestors, animals, or gods. When a person put on such a mask, they temporarily stepped into a different being. They became the role. The community recognized this transformation, treating the masked individual not as themselves, but as the character they embodied. This was not play. It was identity in motion, a fluid sense of self that recognized the possibility of transformation. As societies grew even more complex, social roles became intertwined with hierarchy. Rulers wore symbols of power. Priests wore garments that marked them as intermediaries between the physical and spiritual realms. Warriors wore armor that signified courage and duty. These roles were not simply functional. They carried meaning that shaped how individuals conceived of themselves. Let your shoulders relax. Feel how deeply identity is influenced by the roles society offers us. Some roles empower, others confine, but all shape the ego. In small-scale societies, roles were often collective, shared, and fluid. In large-scale societies, they became more rigid. A person born into a particular class often stayed there for life. This rigidity created tension between the inner self and the outer role. People began to feel the pull between authenticity and expectation. This tension still lives within us. The desire to be true to oneself, balanced against the need to fulfill social roles. The pressure to conform, balanced against the yearning for individuality. Masks can protect, but they can also limit. Consider how a mask can allow someone to act with courage they normally wouldn't feel, or how a role can offer stability during times of uncertainty. Masks and roles help organize the chaos of life. They provide identity scaffolding. But beneath the masks lies something more raw, more vulnerable, more authentic, the parts of ourselves we hide not only from others, but often from ourselves. These hidden parts form what psychologists call the shadow. Take a slow breath, letting it settle deep into the body. The shadow is the next chapter, and approaching it requires gentleness. It is the realm of suppressed emotion, unexpressed potential, forgotten wounds, and deepest fears. Now we descend from the outer layers of identity into the inner caverns where the shadow lives. With quiet awareness, we move forward. The shadow. Every identity has a light side, the qualities we show, the values we embrace, the strengths we celebrate. But there is another side, one far older, deeper, and more hidden. The shadow. The shadow is not darkness in the moral sense. It is simply the part of the psyche that remains unseen, unspoken, or unintegrated. It is everything we push away, deny, fear, suppress, or simply never learn to understand. Take a deep, gentle breath. Let the body soften, as though you're preparing to enter a dim cavern with a small lantern in your hand. The shadow lives in this underworld of the self. It is not an enemy. It is a teacher. It carries pieces of us waiting to return home. The roots of the shadow stretch far back in human evolution. Early humans had instincts, aggression, jealousy, desire, fear that were essential for survival. These instincts still live within us. But as societies grew more cooperative and structured, not all instincts could be expressed safely. Some had to be controlled, others had to be hidden. And so the mind learned to push certain impulses into the background. Imagine a young child in early human society. The child feels anger, curiosity, selfishness, or fear. Some emotions are met with acceptance. Others are met with disapproval. The child begins to hide the emotions that cause trouble, not because they are bad, but because they threaten belonging, and belonging is survival. Let your breath soften. You can feel how this mechanism still exists. Even today, identity forms around what we believe is acceptable. Everything else slips into shadow. As language and culture developed, the divide grew sharper. Heroes were virtuous, villains were cautionary. Myths taught children what was noble and what was forbidden. Rituals rewarded roles and punished impulses. The human psyche learned to split to present a curated self to the world while burying difficult emotions, broken needs, or unfulfilled desires. The shadow is built not only from unacceptable behaviors, but from abandoned potentials. Creativity never explored, confidence never expressed, tenderness never shown, authentic feelings frozen in time. These too become part of the shadow. Take another slow breath. Notice how some parts of yourself feel familiar and open, while others remain quiet, dim, or distant. The shadow is not separate from you. It is simply the part of you that has not yet found light. As early human societies became more moralistic and rule-driven, the shadow deepened. People learned to present faces that aligned with cultural ideals. loyalty, bravery, modesty, purity, devotion. But inside, they still struggled with envy, confusion, doubt, longing, and fear. This split between the outer mask and the inner reality created inner conflict, a tension that echoes through the centuries. Religious traditions across cultures recognize this tension. Many spoke of sin, temptation, impurity, or the battle between good and evil. Yet beneath these teachings lay a psychological truth: humans contain multitudes. The mind is not simple. It is layered, contradictory, vast. Carl Jung, thousands of years later, would give the modern name to this ancient truth: the shadow, the part of the psyche containing everything the conscious identity rejects. But long before Jung, mythologies around the world described shadow in symbolic form: monsters, tricksters, serpents, underworlds, demons, chaotic gods. These figures did not represent evil alone. They represented the hidden aspects of the psyche the forces ignored or repressed. Take a gentle breath, feeling the mystery of those ancient symbols. They were mirrors, showing humans the parts of themselves they feared to confront. The shadow is not a mistake. It is a reservoir, a container of powerful energy. When ignored, it shapes identity unconsciously. It manifests as projections, seeing in others what we cannot face in ourselves. It shows up in sudden emotions we don't understand, in repeated patterns, in unexplained fears, in secret desires, in the behaviors we judge in others while refusing to acknowledge them within. In early human communities, shadow could destabilize relationships, spark conflict, or create internal turmoil. But it could also fuel creativity, courage, insight, and transformation. Many initiation rites were designed to bring individuals face to face with their shadow. Adolescents spent nights alone in the wild, confronted by fear. Warriors entered trance states. Shamans journeyed into symbolic underworlds. These rituals were not merely cultural, they were psychological journeys of integration. Allow your breath to flow naturally. Feel how every human, across time and culture, has walked this path of shadow confrontation. It is universal. When the shadow is acknowledged, something remarkable happens. The energy locked inside becomes usable. Fear can transform into courage, anger into boundaries, desire into creativity, sadness into compassion, trauma into wisdom. Identity becomes less rigid, less reactive, more whole. But when the shadow is denied, it grows stronger. It leaks into behavior. It sabotages relationships. It shapes identity from behind the curtain. It becomes the hidden author of the self. In modern life, the shadow shows up in subtle ways, in jealousy masked as criticism, in fear disguised as control, in insecurity dressed as arrogance, in longing buried beneath distraction. The ego tries to maintain its stability by suppressing these emotions. But suppression creates pressure, and pressure eventually demands release. Take a quiet moment to breathe. Feel how the shadow is not something to fear, but something to understand. A dark forest within the self, rich with roots and unseen life. As identity evolves, the integration of the shadow becomes essential. True self-understanding requires honesty, curiosity, compassion toward the parts of ourselves that were pushed into hiding. When we bring awareness into shadow, we grow, we expand, we reconnect with lost parts of our story. But humans have always used story to make sense of the shadow. Myths, symbols, archetypes. These are the bridges between the conscious self and the hidden realms within. And so, with a gentle exhale, we step from the dark folds of the shadow into the grand architecture of myth. into the stories that shaped civilizations and souls, into the archetypes that live beneath our thoughts and dreams. With quiet awareness, we move now into the next chapter. Myth and archetype. Long before psychology had language for the unconscious, long before neuroscience traced the firing of neurons, humans understood the inner world through stories. Mythology was the earliest mirror held up to the psyche. It showed the soul in symbolic form its fears, its desires, its contradictions, its potential. In myth, identity was not just a personal experience, it was a cosmic drama. Take a gentle, patient breath as we step into humanity's oldest storytelling landscapes, places where gods, heroes, beasts, and mysteries wandered through the human mind. Imagine an ancient gathering at dusk. A small tribe sits around a fire. Sparks rise into the night sky. A storyteller begins speaking in a voice shaped by generations. The tale may be of a hero descending into the underworld, or a trickster reshaping the world with mischief, or a goddess of wisdom guiding lost souls. These stories were not entertainment alone. They were instruction, reflection, truth wrapped in symbol. Myths are the earliest blueprints of identity. They show us who we are, not literally, but archetypally. An archetype is a universal pattern in the psyche, a recurring image, emotion, or idea that emerges across cultures and eras. Archetypes are older than language. They arise from the deep psychological structures shared by all humans. Personality, identity, and behavior are shaped by these ancient motifs. Let your breath soften. Feel the timelessness of these patterns, how stories resonate across centuries because they speak to something fundamental inside us. Consider the archetype of the hero, the one who leaves home, faces trials, discovers strength, confronts fear, and returns transformed. This story exists in thousands of cultures, from Greek epics to African folk tales, from indigenous myths to modern films. The hero's journey is not only a narrative, it is a map of psychological growth. We all confront challenges, we all leave comfort, we all face inner monsters, we all return changed. In the shadow we just explored, those monsters often wear symbolic forms: dragons, serpents, giants, demons. They are not external forces, but internal ones: fear, rage, shame, desire, grief. The hero who slays or befriends the monster is the self integrating the shadow. Take another slow breath. Feel how your own life mirrors this journey, how every challenge you faced has given shape to your identity. Another powerful archetype is the trickster, the one who breaks rules, disrupts order, and exposes hidden truths. Trickster figures appear in nearly all cultures. Loki in Norse mythology, Hermes in Greek stories, Coyote in indigenous American tales, Anansi the spider in African folklore. Tricksters reveal the parts of identity that are playful, chaotic, unexpected. They show that growth is not only achieved through discipline, but also through disruption and creativity. There is also the archetype of the mother, the giver of life, nurturer, protector, guide. This archetype shapes our earliest emotional experiences. It influences how we form attachments, how we trust, how we love. It can be expressed through nature itself, as fertile earth or flowing rivers. The mother archetype speaks to our need for safety and belonging. Opposite this stands the father archetype: order, structure, discipline, boundary, tradition. This archetype teaches us rules, responsibility, and meaning. Whether biological or symbolic, the father energy shapes identity by offering direction and stability. Let your shoulders relax, easing into the recognition that these archetypes are not abstract concepts. They live inside your emotional memory, shaping your perceptions and relationships. Archetypes also include the sage, the wise elder who offers insight, the lover, passionate, connected, intimate, the warrior, courageous and disciplined, the ruler, authoritative, responsible, visionary, the child, innocent, open, full of wonder, the shadow, mysterious, repressed, powerful. These archetypes are not rigid categories. They are fluid forces that move through a person's life. Identity is formed through the interplay of these energies. At times, the warrior dominates. At times, the child emerges. At times, the sage awakens. In this fluid dance, we see identity not as a singular self, but as a constellation of inner figures. Imagine early civilizations rising: Sumer, Egypt, the Indus Valley, China. Their myths grew more elaborate. They created pantheons of gods representing aspects of the psyche. War gods embodied aggression. Fertility goddesses represented creativity and abundance. Underworld deities symbolized death, transformation, and the shadow. These stories were ways of mapping the inner landscape. Take a calm breath. Feel how mythology externalizes inner experience, how it gives shape to emotions that otherwise feel formless. As cultures developed writing, myths became codified. Epic poems, sacred texts, and philosophical traditions emerged. Identity became intertwined with mythic narratives, stories of origins, destiny, morality, and cosmic order. People began to see themselves as part of something larger. Their identities were shaped not only by personal experience, but by the stories their cultures told about existence. Myths gave individuals a sense of belonging. They answered questions that haunted the early mind. Who am I? Why am I here? What is my purpose? What must I overcome? What does it mean to be human? Archetypes also served as psychological templates. A child hearing stories of courage internalized the hero. A young adult learning myths of transformation internalized the sage. A community listening to tales of redemption internalized forgiveness and renewal. These stories shaped values and self-understanding. But myths did more than express identity. They created identity. They offered scripts for how to live, how to die, how to love, how to struggle, how to transcend. The mind absorbed these scripts unconsciously, weaving them into the fabric of personality. Yet mythology was not only outward-facing, it was inward-facing as well. Many myths depict journeys into the underworld, the descent into darkness, followed by a return to light. This represents psychological descent into shadow, followed by the integration of hidden parts of the self. Let your breath deepen slightly. Feel the symbolism of descent and return, how it mirrors emotional healing. As civilizations grew more complex, myth evolved into philosophy, religion, and psychology. But its essence remained: identity is shaped by the stories we tell about ourselves and the world. Now, as we move forward in this journey, we leave the realm of myth and step into the realm of culture. Myth provides symbols. Culture provides structure. In the next chapter, we explore how language, values, custom, and shared meaning become the architecture in which identity lives. If myth is the blueprint of the psyche, culture is the building around it. Take a soft exhale. Feel the transition unfolding naturally. We move now from archetype to the collective forces that shape who we become. Culture and identity. Identity is never formed in isolation. Even the most private thought, the most intimate feeling, the most personal dream is shaped by the cultural landscape into which a person is born. Culture is the invisible architecture around the self, a structure made of language, customs, symbols, and shared beliefs. It tells us what matters, what is acceptable, what is sacred, what is shameful, what is possible. Take a slow, easy breath as we begin this chapter. Feel the mind open, as though entering a vast hall filled with the echoes of thousands of generations. Every sound, every gesture, every idea you carry has an ancestry in culture. Imagine early human communities transitioning from nomadic life to settled villages. With agriculture came permanence. With permanence came tradition. Identity began to root itself not only in survival, but in ritual. The planting season, the harvest, ceremonies for birth, initiation, marriage, and death. Each ritual shaped the individual by placing them inside a larger story, a story of time, nature, community, and meaning. Culture is a shared compass. It tells people where they belong. Let your shoulders relax for a moment. Sense how your own belonging to family, language, community shapes who you think you are. Language is perhaps the most powerful tool culture gives us. It is not merely a way of communicating, it is a way of perceiving. Language shapes thought. It provides categories, distinctions, metaphors, emotional tones. Studies show that speakers of different languages perceive color differently, group objects differently, even remember events differently. Words allow identity to form highly nuanced structures. I am sad. I am excited. I am lost. I am hopeful. These expressions shape the inner landscape. Without language, emotion is raw sensation. With language, it becomes part of the story of self. Imagine a child hearing their name for the first time. A name carries culture, it carries history, it carries expectation. Over time, the child begins to internalize the idea that I refers to this body, this mind, this person. Identity takes shape through words. Culture also gives us roles both explicit and implicit. Daughter, son, elder, leader, caregiver, provider, rebel, artist, thinker. These roles can empower or confine. They can nurture expression or limit possibility. A society might value obedience, shaping children to internalize humility. Another might prize independence, shaping children to internalize confidence. Culture directs the formation of the ego. Take a gentle breath. Notice how many of your beliefs, preferences, and reactions were inherited rather than chosen. Culture lives inside identity long before we become aware of it. Customs and traditions offer continuity. They allow people to feel rooted in something ancient. Consider rites of passage ceremonies that mark transitions, such as adulthood, marriage, or leadership. These rituals don't merely celebrate a life stage. They rewrite the participant's identity. They give cultural recognition to inner transformation. Yet culture can also create tension. What if the role given by society doesn't match the inner self? What if the expectations of the community conflict with personal truth? When identity clashes with cultural norms, the individual faces a psychological crossroads: conform, rebel, or redefine. These tensions have shaped countless lives and movements throughout history. Let your breath deepen. Feel the complexity of living within a cultural framework, the mix of belonging and pressure, meaning and constraint. Culture shapes moral identity as well. What one society considers virtuous, another may consider undesirable. Honor, loyalty, purity, respect, ambition, compassion, and each culture elevates different values. These values become internalized as subtle instructions within the psyche. Over time, they shape personality. A person raised where emotional expression is encouraged develops differently from one raised where emotions must be concealed. Culture also shapes emotional identity. Some languages have dozens of words for specific emotions. Others have very few. These differences influence how individuals interpret their inner experiences. For example, certain cultures have unique words for emotions like longing, communal joy, or grief shared across a community. When a culture has a name for an emotion, it becomes easier to recognize, express, and integrate. Imagine a community gathering to mourn. Their rituals may include wailing, singing, storytelling, or silence. Each approach teaches its members how to feel, how to express, how to heal. Culture becomes the emotional educator. Now consider art, one of the most profound expressions of culture. Cave paintings, music, dance, carving, weaving, pottery. Art reflects the inner world of a people. It shapes and mirrors identity. It communicates what cannot be spoken through ordinary language. Even today, music can evoke emotions we didn't know we carried. Visual art can reveal truths before we can express them. Culture shapes creativity, and creativity reshapes culture in return. Take a moment to breathe softly. Feel how music, art, and stories from your own background have shaped your sense of self, your moods, your worldview. Religion and spirituality also play massive roles in identity formation. They give frameworks for understanding existence, why we are here, what matters, how to live, how to treat others, what lies beyond life. For many, spiritual identity is the deepest layer of self, connecting them to ancestors, community, and the cosmos. Yet, cultural identity is never static. It evolves. As communities change through migration, trade, exploration, and conflict, their identities shift. Humans have always borrowed ideas from one another, blending languages, rituals, and beliefs. Identity becomes layered, part ancestral, part inherited, part chosen. These shifts can create both richness and confusion. People may feel torn between cultural worlds. They may feel pressure to maintain tradition and pressure to adapt. This tension shapes many modern identities. Let your breath ease. Feel the truth of this, that you are not shaped by one culture alone, but by countless influences from history, family, environment, and the global web of information. Culture also constructs collective identity, the sense of we, national identity, ethnic identity, religious identity, political identity. These large-scale narratives can unite millions, offering belonging and purpose. But they can also divide. They create in-groups and out-groups. They shape perception, empathy, and conflict. The collective identity becomes a powerful force. It offers strength, but it can also overshadow personal truth. Throughout history, individuals have struggled to reconcile personal identity with cultural identity. Those who challenge cultural norms, artists, philosophers, rebels, seekers, often face resistance. Yet their questioning pushes culture forward, expanding the possibilities of identity for future generations. With one more slow breath, feel how culture holds you, shapes you, and sometimes challenges you. Identity exists within culture, like a flame within a lantern glowing with its own light, but shaped by the boundaries that surround it. But even within the cultural container, there is a tender, private core of identity formed very early in life. A part shaped not by society at large, but by the intimate emotional environment of childhood. We now enter that core, the place where identity is soft, vulnerable, impressionable. The place where attachment and emotion carve patterns that last a lifetime. With quiet awareness, we move into the next chapter, the inner child. At the center of every identity, beneath culture, beneath roles, beneath ego, beneath even the shadow, lives a small and tender presence, the inner child. This is not a metaphor for immaturity. It is not a childish part of us. It is the earliest emotional self, the part that learned how to love, how to fear, how to trust, how to protect, and how to survive. Take a slow, soothing breath as we step into this most delicate region of identity. Feel the softness of this space, like walking into a room filled with old memories and quiet echoes. The inner child begins forming long before a person can speak. Before words, before roles, before self-concepts, the nervous system absorbs experience directly. The infant brain is wired for connection. It seeks warmth. It seeks safety. It seeks attunement, the feeling of being seen and understood. Identity begins not in thought, but in relationship. Imagine a newborn, eyes still adjusting to the light, heart beating in soft sync with the world around them. They cannot understand language, but they know the difference between comfort and threat. A warm touch is safety. A cold absence is danger. A gentle voice is reassurance. A harsh sound is alarm. These sensations form the emotional blueprint of identity. Let your breath soften as you imagine this early state of being, a world experienced through pure sensation. In early childhood, the developing sense of self is shaped entirely by caregivers. They are the mirrors in which the child sees their worth. A secure attachment, consistent affection, reliability, emotional attunement teaches the child that the world is safe and that they are lovable. This becomes the foundation of a healthy identity. But when attachment is inconsistent, distant, chaotic, or frightening, the child learns different lessons. They may learn to suppress emotions, to keep peace, or to become hypervigilant, scanning for danger, or to cling desperately for reassurance, or to withdraw to protect themselves. These adaptations are not flaws. They are survival strategies. The child becomes who they must be to stay connected. Identity begins here as an emotional response to relationship. Take another slow breath. Notice how your own patterns of emotional reaction echo your earliest experiences. The way you respond to closeness, the way you handle conflict, the way you seek connection. Beneath all of it is the inner child, shaped long before memory. For a young child, needs are simple but profound. They need to be held, to be comforted, to be understood, to be accepted, to feel safe enough to explore. When these needs are met, the child develops a sense of trust and curiosity. When they are unmet, the child adapts in ways that will shape identity for years to come. Imagine a toddler learning to walk. They stumble, fall, cry. If a caregiver approaches with warmth, the child feels capable. I can try again. If the caregiver reacts with impatience or absence, the child may internalize shame or fear. These early emotional impressions form core beliefs, deep, quiet statements inside the child's mind. I am safe. I am unsafe. I am loved. I am too much. I am not enough. These beliefs become the foundation of identity. Let your shoulders soften. Feel how these inner beliefs still echo inside you, even now. They shape confidence, desire, boundaries, and dreams. They whisper beneath the surface of the adult self. As the child grows, imagination begins to flourish. This imagination is not frivolous. It is a coping tool. A child who feels safe imagines freely creating worlds of wonder and possibility. A child who feels scared imagines for protection, conjuring heroes, companions, or fantasies that soothe fear. Imagination becomes the first form of narrative identity. The child begins telling themselves stories to understand their experience. These early stories become emotional templates. A child who sees themselves as brave grows into confidence. A child who sees themselves as invisible grows into self-doubt. A child who learns they must be perfect to be loved grows into constant pressure. A child who learns they must hide their feelings grows into emotional silence. Pause for a gentle breath. Feel the tenderness of these early stories. They are not childish. They are the beginnings of identity's architecture. In ancient societies, children were raised within close-knit communities. Aunts, uncles, elders, and siblings all contributed to shaping the child's identity. The child belonged to the tribe, and the tribe belonged to them. This shared responsibility offered a broader emotional environment. But as societies evolved and family structures changed, children increasingly grew up in smaller units, often with fewer emotional resources. This shift placed greater pressure on the primary bond between caregiver and child, making early experiences even more formative. As childhood continues, identity expands through play. Play is exploration, experimentation, risk-taking in a safe space. Through play, children learn who they are: curious, bold, cautious, imaginative, social, solitary. Play reveals personality long before a child can put it into words. Let your breath deepen softly. Think of play as the purest form of identity expression, before society teaches rules, before ego develops defenses, before shadow takes shape. But childhood is rarely perfect. Even in loving families, misunderstandings happen. Emotional needs go unnoticed. Parents, carrying their own wounds, may pass patterns down through generations. A child might become the peacemaker, the achiever, the caregiver, the rebel, the invisible one. Each role becomes part of identity. Trauma can also shape the inner child deeply. Not only dramatic events, but small, repeated emotional injuries, neglect, criticism, unpredictability, lack of affection. These experiences shape core beliefs about self-worth, safety, love, and identity. When these early wounds remain unhealed, the inner child continues to act within the adult self. A raised voice may activate old fear. A rejection may trigger old shame. A compliment may feel suspicious. A close relationship may evoke vulnerability. The adult may feel reactions that do not match the present moment because they belong to the past. Take a slow breath. Notice how your inner child still speaks through emotions, impulses, and sensitivities. Identity is not only what we have become, it is also who we once were, still living inside us. But the inner child is not only wounded. It carries joy, wonder, creativity, innocence, curiosity, and imagination. These are essential aspects of identity too. As adults grow and mature, reconnecting with the inner child can restore vitality and authenticity that were lost over time. In many ancient cultures, rites of passage guided the transition from childhood to adulthood. These rituals acknowledged the inner child and then marked the beginning of a more mature identity. Today, without such rituals, many people struggle to bridge that transition. The inner child remains active, influencing adult decisions, relationships, and ambitions in ways that feel mysterious or overwhelming. Understanding the inner child is essential for understanding identity. Without acknowledging this early part of the self, the adult identity remains incomplete. And so, as we continue this journey, we move from the tenderness of the inner child into the parts of identity that fracture under pressure: the fragmented self. The self divided by trauma, conditioning, and survival strategies. Take one more soft breath. Feel the transition gently unfolding. We now step into the next chapter. The fragmented self. Identity, though it may feel singular, is rarely whole. It is more often a mosaic of parts, each shaped by different experiences, emotions, and survival strategies. In times of safety, these parts coexist smoothly, but under pressure, trauma, fear, unmet needs, overwhelming experiences, the self can fracture, not break, but divide, split into adaptive identities designed to protect. Take a slow, steady breath as we enter this terrain. Let your body soften, as though preparing to walk through a landscape of echoes and reflections. The fragmented self is not a pathology. It is an ancient survival mechanism. It is what the mind does when it must protect both the child and the continuity of identity. Imagine a young child who faces circumstances too overwhelming to process. Emotional neglect, unpredictable anger, unsafe environments, the absence of comfort, or experiences that rupture their sense of safety. The child cannot fight, they cannot flee. Their nervous system instead learns to fragment, to create separate emotional compartments. One part holds the fear. Another part holds the longing. Another part carries the responsibility. Another part becomes invisible. Another becomes the achiever. Another becomes the protector. Identity becomes a constellation of selves. Let your breath drift gently in and out. Notice how, even within your adult self, different emotional states feel like different versions of you. This is normal. It is human. The fragmented self lives in everyone. Fragmentation begins as an act of mercy. The mind says, "This is too much to feel all at once. Let me divide it so you can survive." A frightened part steps aside so a functional part can go to school. A wounded part retreats so a social part can make friends. A vigilant part stays awake at night to protect the whole. These parts are not mistakes. They are guardians. As children grow, they learn to identify with the parts that gain approval. The responsible part, the polite part, the funny part, the strong part. Meanwhile, the parts that express fear, anger, or vulnerability may be pushed deeper into the shadow. But those parts remain alive within identity, influencing behavior from beneath awareness. Take a soft breath. Feel the internal complexity, the sense that you are not one thing, but many. In some people, fragmentation is subtle. A person becomes a slightly different version of themselves at work, at home, with friends, or when alone. They shift tone, attitude, emotional openness. These shifts feel natural. In others, fragmentation is more pronounced. The inner child may govern emotional responses in intimate relationships. The inner critic may dominate in moments of self-doubt. The protector part may override compassion when danger is perceived. The achiever may push the body beyond exhaustion. These internal parts take turns steering the self. The more overwhelming the childhood environment, the stronger the fragmentation. Not because something is wrong, but because the mind is doing everything it can to survive. Let your shoulders relax. Feel the compassion that arises when you understand that the fragmented self is not broken. It is heroic. In many indigenous cultures, the idea of soul fragmentation was widely recognized. Shamans believed that trauma could cause parts of the soul to split off, requiring retrieval through ritual. These practices symbolized reintegration, the return of lost parts of identity. Modern psychology echoes this ancient wisdom through trauma therapy, parts work, and inner child healing. The fragmented self can show up in many ways. The pleaser who keeps peace to avoid conflict. The protector who shuts down emotions when they feel unsafe. The perfectionist who strives for flawlessness to avoid shame. The rebel who pushes against authority to assert autonomy. The invisible one who disappears to avoid being hurt. The caregiver who nurtures others to feel valued. The controller who manages everything to prevent fear. The artist who channels emotion into creativity. The child who still holds the original wounds and wonder. Take another slow breath. Let compassion flood the system as you recognize these parts within yourself or others. Each one formed for a reason. Each one carries a story. Trauma intensifies fragmentation. When the nervous system becomes overwhelmed repeatedly, the mind creates even more distinct parts to manage emotion. These parts can function independently, with their own beliefs, impulses, and memories. Some hold pain, some hold resilience, some hold hope, some hold fear. This internal division creates emotional echoes in adulthood. A small remark triggers a disproportionate reaction. A relationship feels terrifying and comforting at the same time. A success feels undeserved. A failure feels catastrophic. A compliment feels suspicious. A separation feels like abandonment. These are not irrational responses. They are the reactions of fragmented parts still living in past emotional landscapes. Identity becomes a system, a community of inner selves, each trying to protect the whole. Let your breath ease. Feel the complexity of your inner world with gentle acceptance. Healing the fragmented self is not about eliminating parts. It is about bringing them into harmony. Integration means accepting each part's role, understanding its purpose, and allowing it to reintegrate into the larger identity. This healing often begins with awareness, noticing when a child part is activated, when a protector is speaking, when the critic is loud, when shame rises from deep memory. This awareness creates space. Space allows healing, and healing allows a more unified identity to emerge, one that includes all parts, not just the ones society approves of. Identity becomes whole, not by rejecting fragments, but by welcoming them home. As we leave this chapter, take a soft, grounding breath. The fragmented self is complex, but it is also powerful. It holds the map of your survival, your resilience, your story. Now we step into the next realm, the science of self-awareness. From ancient emotions and survival adaptations to the neurological foundations of introspection, we explore how the brain creates the experience of I. With calm awareness, we move forward. The science of self-awareness. To understand how identity emerges, we must journey into the brain itself, into the neural architecture that shapes thought, emotion, memory, and meaning. Self-awareness is not simply a philosophical idea. It is a biological phenomenon. A pattern of electrical signals, chemical cascades, and network interactions that give rise to the experience of being someone. Take a slow, grounding breath as we step into this inner universe. Feel the mind steady, as though preparing to observe itself. Self-awareness is one of the most extraordinary capacities of the human brain. Few species possess anything comparable. While many animals have instincts, emotions, intelligence, and even complex social structures, only a handful show signs of reflective consciousness, the ability to think about thought, to observe inner states, to recognize oneself as a self. Humans are the masters of this capacity. But how does the brain create the self? To answer this, we must understand several key systems: the default mode network, the prefrontal cortex, the insula, the limbic system, the mirror neuron system. Each contributes to the experience of identity. Let your breath soften as we explore these networks gently, one at a time. The default mode network, often abbreviated DMN, is the brain's introspective engine. It becomes active when we are not focused on the outside world, when we daydream, remember, plan, imagine, reflect, or drift into thought. It is the network of the wandering mind, and when the mind wanders, it tends to wander toward itself. This is no accident. The DMN stitches past experiences with future possibilities, creating a continuous narrative of the self. It allows you to recall who you were and imagine who you might become. It generates the sense of I as a story that exists through time. Take a soft breath. Notice how often your own mind drifts into self-reflection, replaying conversations, imagining alternatives, rehearsing future scenarios. The DMN creates this flow. Now consider the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain behind your forehead. This region is central to planning, decision-making, impulse control, moral reasoning, and personality. It is the executive of the brain, coordinating behavior in alignment with identity. It asks questions like, who am I in this situation? What should I do? What aligns with my values? Without the prefrontal cortex, identity loses structure. People become impulsive, inconsistent, unable to follow their own narratives. This region allows us to maintain coherence across time, aligning present actions with future desires. Pause and breathe. Recognize how the decisions you make daily are shaped by this neural circuitry. The insula is another key structure. It receives sensory information from within the body: heartbeat, breath, stomach sensations, muscle tension. This creates interoception, the sense of what is happening inside you. Interoception is essential for identity because emotions begin as bodily sensations. Fear tightens the chest. Sadness lowers energy. Joy warms the torso. Anger raises heat. The insula integrates these sensations into conscious awareness, allowing you to say, "This is how I feel." In many ways, identity begins in the body. Let the breath deepen slightly. Notice one sensation in your body: warmth, coolness, pressure, ease. This simple awareness is the foundation of the conscious self. Now we arrive at the limbic system, the emotional brain. This network includes the amygdala, hippocampus, and several interconnected regions responsible for emotion, memory, and survival responses. The limbic system gives color to experience. Without it, life would feel flat, dull, empty. Emotion is not a distraction from identity. It is the fuel of identity. The amygdala detects threat and novelty. The hippocampus weaves emotion into memory, giving experience meaning. Together, they shape what you remember and how you interpret it. Emotion guides identity by showing you what matters. Take a quiet breath. Feel how emotions give your life depth and narrative movement. Finally, the mirror neuron system allows us to understand other minds. These neurons activate not only when we perform an action, but when we see someone else perform it. When another person smiles, cries, or gestures, the mirror neurons simulate that experience internally, giving us empathy and understanding. This system is essential for social identity. It helps us learn, connect, and interpret the intentions of others. It shapes how we present ourselves and how we perceive interpersonal dynamics. Without this system, identity would be isolated, unable to reflect or adapt. With it, identity becomes relational, shaped by interaction, empathy, and shared emotion. Let your breath settle. Feel how interconnectedness shapes who you are. All of these systems together create the illusion or the experience of a unified self. Yet neuroscience shows that identity is not a single thing. It is an emergent phenomenon, a story the brain tells itself, a pattern arising from billions of interactions every second. The self is less like a solid stone and more like a river continuously changing, continuously flowing, yet appearing unified. Some neuroscientists argue that the self is an illusion, a useful fiction created by the brain. Others argue that the self is real, but fluid. What is certain is that the feeling of I emerges from processes deeper than language or introspection. It emerges from perception, sensation, memory, and emotion. Consider how the sense of self shifts throughout the day. You are not the same self when you wake up groggy, when you feel confident at work, when you laugh with friends, when you grieve, when you reflect quietly. The self transforms constantly, shaped by internal states and external contexts. Yet there is a continuity, a thread that feels like me. Take one more slow breath. Feel that quiet thread. Now consider mindfulness, the practice of observing thoughts, emotions, and sensations without identifying with them. Mindfulness reduces activity in the default mode network, revealing a deeper layer of awareness beneath the narrative self. Practitioners often describe experiences of spaciousness, clarity, and presence beyond ego. This suggests that identity has multiple layers. The narrative self, shaped by memory and story. The emotional self, shaped by sensation and meaning. The relational self, shaped by social connection. The protective self, shaped by ego and defense. The essential self, shaped by pure awareness. This essential self is quiet, subtle, hard to describe. It is the awareness behind thought, the witness, the space within which identity arises. It is here that ego begins to loosen and essence begins to emerge. Before we go there, let your breath settle softly. Feel a moment of stillness, a gentle spaciousness behind your thoughts. Now we move from the biological architecture of self to the philosophical and spiritual dimension, the possibility that identity is not only constructed, but transcended. With a calm exhale, we step into the next chapter, beyond ego. Beyond the layers of memory, emotion, culture, and psychological structure lies something that cannot be easily named, something quieter than thought, older than identity, and more spacious than any story the mind can construct. This chapter explores that dimension, the realm beyond ego, the realm of essence. Take a slow, open breath. Let your shoulders soften. Imagine the mind growing just a little wider, as though something inside is listening from a deeper place. Ego is essential. It protects. It organizes. It gives shape to the narrative of me. But ego is not the whole of who we are. Beneath it lies a presence untouched by roles, preferences, fears, or achievements. This presence is not a belief or philosophy. It is an experience, one that humanity has explored for thousands of years through meditation, contemplation, ritual, philosophy, and spiritual inquiry. Identity begins with separation, inner versus outer, self versus other, me versus not me. But essence begins with connection. It begins where separation softens, where the boundaries of ego loosen, just enough for awareness to expand. Imagine a quiet early morning, long before human civilization. A solitary human stands at the edge of a cliff, watching the sunrise over a vast landscape. In that moment, something shifts. The sense of I becomes small, porous, transparent. The world feels intimate, and the self feels infinite. This is not ego. This is essence. Take a gentle breath. Allow yourself a moment of spaciousness. Across cultures, spiritual traditions have attempted to describe this deeper layer of identity, each with its own language and metaphors. In Buddhism, the concept of no self anatta suggests that the self is not fixed. It is a collection of processes constantly changing. When the mind observes itself without attachment, it discovers that identity is fluid, not solid. The ego loosens. Awareness expands. In Hindu philosophy, the concept of Atman, the inner self, is described as eternal consciousness, untouched by change. Atman is present behind every experience, every emotion, every thought, like the sky behind passing clouds. In Taoism, the self is understood as inseparable from nature. Identity is not confined to the body or the mind, but flows with the Tao, the natural rhythm of existence. Here, ego is seen as resistance, and essence is surrender. Let your breath flow naturally. These ideas are not abstract. They point to something felt in moments of stillness. Mystics across traditions. Christian, Sufi, Kabbalistic, indigenous describe a similar experience. A sense of unity, a softening of boundaries, an awareness that transcends personal identity. They speak of presence, grace, spirit, oneness. This does not require religious belief. It requires only that the mind becomes quiet enough to perceive it in itself without the filter of ego. Modern neuroscience offers insight into this experience. Studies show that during deep meditation, activity in the default mode network decreases. This is the network responsible for self-referential thinking. The internal voice that says, "I am this, I feel that. This is my story." When this network quiets, people report a sense of expansion, clarity, and interconnectedness. Instead of being the center of a narrative, the sense of self becomes a field of awareness, a spacious, observing presence, not a character, but the container in which the character appears. Take a breath and sense the space between thoughts. That space is essence. This does not mean ego disappears. It simply means ego is no longer the only voice. It becomes one tool among many, a helpful navigator, but not the pilot of the entire experience. Beyond ego, the self becomes more fluid, more compassionate, less entangled in fear, comparison, and judgment. The need to defend identity softens because identity is no longer experienced as fragile or singular. There is a sense of enoughness, a sense of being. In this state, identity is not something to protect, but something to observe with curiosity. The fragmented parts of the self begin to integrate. The inner child feels safe. The shadow becomes a source of strength. The ego relaxes. The social self becomes more authentic. The cultural self becomes more flexible. Beyond ego, life feels less like a performance and more like a presence. Take a deep, easy breath. Imagine the mind resting in awareness, like a bird settling into a quiet nest. Philosophers across time have touched this dimension. Spinoza described the self as part of a larger infinite substance. Hume described the self as a bundle of perceptions, constantly changing. Kierkegaard saw identity as a relationship with itself. Nietzsche saw the self as a dynamic creation. Existentialists saw identity as something we choose moment by moment. But beyond philosophy, the experience is simple. It is the moment when the mind stops becoming and simply is. Think of times you felt this. Watching a sunset in silence. Sitting by the ocean, listening to waves. Holding the hand of someone you love. Losing yourself in music or art. Walking alone at night under a quiet sky. Feeling awe in nature. Being deeply present with another person. In these moments, identity expands. Ego steps aside. Essence shines through. Essence does not erase individuality. It deepens it. It allows identity to be anchored in something larger than thought. It offers a sense of peace, not dependent on achievement, approval, or control. This is where healing happens, where integration happens, where wholeness becomes possible. Now take one more slow, comforting breath. Feel the mind soften, widen, become spacious. The journey beyond ego is the journey into presence, the ground from which true identity emerges. As we move toward the final chapter, we shift from the ancient threads of essence to the evolving future of identity, shaped now by technology, interconnectedness, and the digital mirrors we create. With gentle awareness, we step forward. The future of identity. Identity is ancient, but it is not fixed. It evolves with every generation, every innovation, every shift in how humans live and relate. And now, in the modern world, identity is transforming faster than at any other point in history. Technology, globalization, artificial intelligence, virtual worlds, and digital communication are reshaping what it means to be a self. Take a slow, steady breath as we move into this expansive terrain. Feel the mind open, as if stepping into a landscape filled with possibilities, uncertainties, and entirely new forms of human experience. For most of human history, identity was rooted in place, the land you lived on, the tribe or community that raised you, the customs you inherited, the stories passed down, the roles you were expected to fill. Identity was local, familial, cultural, embodied. But in the last few centuries, identity began to unroot itself. The rise of literacy allowed people to imagine themselves beyond their village. The printing press spread ideas across continents. Urbanization brought strangers into daily contact. Mass education introduced children to worlds their ancestors couldn't imagine. The internet connected humanity at lightning speed. Each of these developments transformed how humans see themselves. Take a soft breath. Notice how your own identity has been shaped by ideas, voices, and cultures far beyond your physical surroundings. The future of identity is already here, unfolding in your thoughts. Consider the digital age. Today, people inhabit multiple realities. The physical self, your body, senses, daily experiences. The psychological self, your emotions, memories, and beliefs. The social self, your relationships, roles, and interactions. The digital self, your online presence, profiles, and expressions. The virtual self, avatars, simulations, and alternate identities. The imagined self, your dreams, aspirations, and inner narratives. Identity is no longer singular. It is multi-layered, flexible, adaptive. Let your breath flow gently. Feel the fluidity of modern identity. In the digital world, people can become versions of themselves that may not exist offline. They can express parts of identity that felt suppressed. They can explore new perspectives, new communities, new forms of belonging. This expansion can be liberating. A teenager in a rural town can find a global community that understands them better than anyone nearby. A person struggling with loneliness can find connection. A person constrained by cultural norms can express their true identity in a safe digital space. The internet also allows identity to be consciously shaped. Profiles, posts, photos, and messages become curated mirrors. People choose which versions of themselves to reveal and which to hide. This creates new possibilities, but also new pressures. Pause for a breath. Feel the complexity of presenting yourself in a world where eyes are everywhere. Artificial intelligence adds another layer. Algorithms learn from behavior, predicting desires, shaping attention, curating information. They act as mirrors and amplifiers of identity. They reflect back to us our preferences, fears, curiosities, and biases. They shape the environment in which identity forms. AI also challenges the boundaries of self. Digital companions, intelligent systems, and virtual entities increasingly resemble human interaction. They blur the lines between internal and external, between personal thought and technological influence. With a gentle breath, consider how identity interacts with these new companions. How the mind adapts when presence is no longer limited to humans. Virtual reality expands the landscape even further. VR offers the possibility of stepping out of physical identity entirely to become a different body, a different form, a different being. In these worlds, identity can be fluid. People can experiment with gender, personality, role, even species. They can reconstruct childhood environments or imagine entirely new realities. These virtual selves do not replace the physical self, but they add new dimensions to identity dimensions older humans could only experience in dreams or myths. The future may bring even more radical transformations. Brain-computer interfaces could allow direct connection between thought and technology. Digital memory storage could augment or preserve identity. Virtual consciousness simulations may allow fragments of identity to exist beyond the body. Genetic engineering might influence temperament, emotion regulation, or cognitive style. Collective consciousness technologies might create shared experiences beyond language. Take a slow, grounding breath. These possibilities may feel strange, exciting, unsettling. That is natural. Identity has always evolved in response to new tools. But even as technology reshapes the external layers of identity, the internal layers, emotion, memory, attachment, shadow, ego, essence, remain fundamentally human. In the future, people may have many selves, many avatars, many roles, many digital reflections. Yet the core questions remain unchanged. Who am I? Where do I belong? What matters? What feels true? What lies beneath the stories I tell about myself? The future of identity is not about replacing humanity with technology. It is about expanding the range of human experience, allowing identity to stretch into new spaces while still rooted in ancient biological and emotional foundations. But this expansion brings responsibility. In a world of infinite selves, we must learn to anchor in essence, to return to presence, to recognize the difference between the roles we play and the truth of who we are beneath those roles. Take one more slow, thoughtful breath. The future of identity is uncertain, but it is also full of possibility. The self will continue to evolve, not only outward through innovation, but inward through awareness. Now, as we reach the final part of this long journey, we gather all the threads, biological, psychological, cultural, spiritual, technological, and weave them into a closing reflection. A reflection on the journey from ego to essence. A reflection on what it means and has always meant to be a self. With quiet clarity, we move into the final chapter. Closing. Identity began as a boundary, a fragile membrane separating inner from outer in a young and restless world. It grew through sensation, emotion, memory, and story. It expanded in the forests where the social brain emerged, in the fireside circles where myths were born, in the intimate bonds of family, in the cultural frameworks that shaped values and meaning. It deepened through shadows and wounds. It strengthened through adaptation and survival. It fragmented and reintegrated. It created masks, roles, and entire civilizations. It grew quiet in moments of stillness. It stretched across digital landscapes and into futures we are only beginning to imagine. Take a slow, deep breath. Let the entire journey settle in the mind, like a long exhale after a lifetime of curiosity. Identity is not one thing. It is many things. It is history. It is emotion. It is memory. It is instinct. It is culture. It is imagination. It is survival. It is a story told across billions of years. And yet, something deeper remains. Something beneath the layers, beneath the roles, beneath the fears and the hopes. Something beyond the ego. Essence. The quiet awareness that experiences everything. The sensations of the body, the thoughts of the mind, the emotions that rise and fall like tides, the stories that change with time. Essence is the witness, the spaciousness within which identity unfolds. Imagine sitting at the edge of a quiet lake near dusk. The water is still. The sky reflects on its surface. Thoughts pass across your awareness like ripples, but beneath them there is depth, calm, stillness. This depth is essence. Take another slow breath. Feel the still point within you, the part untouched by expectations, mistakes, achievements, and fears. The part that simply is. Identity is not something you find once and keep forever. It is something you discover, lose, rediscover, and transform throughout life. It moves with the seasons of the soul. It shifts with relationships, with loss, with growth, with experience. It contracts during fear and expands in moments of insight. The journey from ego to essence is not a straight path. It loops, it spirals, it unfolds. Some days identity feels fragile. Other days it feels expansive. Some days ego protects. Other days essence shines through. Both are part of being human. Let your shoulders relax gently. Let the breath settle into a natural rhythm. Feel the fullness of your humanity, layered, complex, beautiful. As we conclude this long journey together, reflect on the many selves within you. The ancient biological self that learned to survive. The emotional child who learned to love and protect. The cultural self, shaped by language and story. The social self, shaped by connection. The narrative self, shaped by memory. The protective ego, shaped by experience. The shadow, filled with hidden truths. The essential self, filled with presence and awareness. All of these selves belong to you. They are not in conflict. They form the mosaic of your identity, a dynamic, evolving expression of the universe, becoming conscious through you. Take one last, deep, soothing breath. Let it fill the body and release slowly. As the journey closes, know this: identity is not fixed. You are not finished. You are becoming, always, a story unfolding, a consciousness expanding. A self discovering itself, moment by moment. From ego to essence, the path is lifelong, but every breath is a step. Every moment of awareness is a doorway, and every question, who am I? What is true? What remains when everything else falls away? Brings you closer to the quiet center of your being. Thank you for traveling this vast landscape of mind, memory, story, and soul. Where you go next is your own unfolding. The journey continues in the depths of your awareness, in the silence between thoughts, in the breath you are taking right now, in the presence that has been with you all along. Rest here, in essence.